The African kingdom of Nzalanga basked under a golden sun, its lands bursting with life and colour. The bustling markets sang with the sounds of traders calling out their wares, their stalls overflowing with handmade jewellery, fresh fruits, and vibrant fabrics. Laughter and music spilled from every corner of the villages, where traditions were deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. Towering baobab trees dotted the horizon, their thick trunks seeming to hold up the sky, while the distant mountains stood like silent guardians over the kingdom. Life in Nzalanga thrived, but behind the grandeur and celebration lay hidden shadows, particularly in the once noble household of Chief Bakari. Zalika, the chief's only daughter, possessed a beauty that seemed to echo the very essence of the kingdom. Her deep brown eyes carried the warmth of the earth, and her radiant smile could rival the brilliance of the morning sun. Yet, her life was anything but radiant. Since her father's untimely death, she'd been forced into the role of a servant in her own home. Her stepmother, Nshima, ruled the household with an iron fist, her cunning mind always plotting, her sharp tongue lashing out at every perceived flaw. Nshima was a woman whose greed knew no bounds, and she wasted no time claiming control of Bakari's wealth and estate after his mysterious passing. Zalika's days were filled with endless chores, her delicate hands now roughened by hard labour. From dawn till dusk, she scrubbed the floors, cooked meals, and tended to the animals. The rich silks she once wore were replaced by tattered clothes, and the respect she once commanded was stripped away, replaced by cold disdain from her stepmother and stepsister, Maleka. Maleka, though not as cunning as her mother, mirrored her arrogance and treated Zalika with equal cruelty. Together, they delighted in reminding her of her lowly place, as if the memory of Chief Bakari's love for his daughter had been erased entirely. Despite the darkness that engulfed her home, Zalika's spirit remained unbroken. She found solace in the forest at the edge of the village, a place her father used to take her when she was a child. The forest felt alive, its towering trees swaying in rhythm with the wind, their whispers offering her comfort. Birds of every colour chirped above her, and animals emerged from the underbrush, as if drawn to her gentle presence. She would sit by the crystal-clear stream, her reflection staring back at her with quiet determination. It was here, surrounded by nature's embrace, that Zalika dared to dream of a better life. She imagined a world where she could be free, where her stepmother's cruel voice could no longer reach her, and where she could honour her father's memory without fear. In her heart, Zalika knew she was meant for more than the life of servitude she endured. The kingdom of Anzalanga was vast and full of possibilities, and though the path seemed unclear, she felt an unshakable pull towards something greater. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the land in hues of orange and purple, Zalika would rise from her spot by the stream, her resolve hardened. No matter how much Nshima tried to crush her, Zalika clung to the hope that destiny had something extraordinary in store for her. Nshima's jealousy burned like a hidden ember, a quiet yet consuming fire that threatened to engulf everything in its path. Every time she looked at Zalika, she saw a reflection of everything her own daughter, Maleka, could never be. Zalika's beauty was not just physical. It was the quiet elegance with which she carried herself, the kindness in her voice, and the light in her eyes that drew people to her. It enraged Nshima to no end. How dare this girl, the child of her late husband's first wife, shine brighter than her own flesh and blood? Maleka, though adorned in the finest silks and gold, lacked the poise and grace that Zalika seemed to possess effortlessly. One morning, the palace criers rode into the village, their trumpets echoing through the streets. People gathered in a frenzy, murmuring in excitement as the criers unfurled a royal scroll. "Hear ye, people of Nzalanga," the lead crier announced, his voice booming. "Prince Oba, heir to the throne, has begun his search for a bride. A grand festival will be held in his honour at the royal palace. All eligible maidens of the kingdom are commanded to attend." The news spread like wildfire, and the village erupted in celebration. Mothers began preparing their daughters. Tailors worked tirelessly to create dazzling dresses, and whispers of hope filled the air. In the Bakari household, however, the announcement sparked something far more sinister. Nashema's sharp eyes glittered with ambition as she turned to Malika. "This is our chance," she hissed. "Prince Oba will choose his bride at the festival, and it must be you, Malika. Do you understand? This is your destiny." Malika, whose vanity only matched her mother's cunning, smirked and nodded. "Of course, mother. Who else could it be?" But even as Nashema began plotting, her thoughts drifted to Zalika. The mere idea of Zalika standing before the prince was intolerable. She knew that no amount of gold or jewels could outshine Zalika's natural beauty and grace. If Zalika attended, she would steal every ounce of attention and possibly the prince's heart. Nashema's jealousy twisted into something darker, a hatred so consuming it left no room for reason. That evening, Nashema cornered Zalika in the kitchen, where the girl was busy scrubbing the floor. "Zalika," she began, her voice sickly sweet. "You've heard the announcement, I'm sure. A festival for the prince. But don't get any ideas, child. Such events are not for the likes of you." Zalika paused, looking up with confusion. "But all maidens have been invited. Surely I can—" "Enough!" Nashema snapped, her voice like a whip. "Look at you. You have no dress, no jewels, nothing that makes you worthy of standing in a royal hall. You'll embarrass this family with your presence. No, you will stay here and finish the chores while Malika and I attend the festival." Zalika's heart sank, but she knew better than to argue. Nashema's word was law in the household, and defiance only led to more punishment. Still, a part of her dared to dream. She had always longed to see the royal palace, to experience the grandeur of such an event, even if only for a moment. Meanwhile, Nashema and Malika wasted no time putting their plan into motion. Nashema hired the finest seamstresses to craft an elaborate gown for Malika, complete with golden embroidery and precious gemstones. She spent days coaching her daughter on how to behave, what to say, and how to charm the prince. Nashema even went so far as to bribe one of the palace attendants, slipping him a hefty pouch of coins to ensure Malika would receive special attention during the festival. "She must be the first maiden the prince sees," Nashema instructed the attendant. "Make sure she has the best spot in the hall, where no one can ignore her presence." The attendant, though wary of Nashema's sharp demeanor, accepted the bribe with a nod. As the days passed, Zalika watched silently from the shadows as Malika paraded around in her new dress, her laughter filling the halls. Nashema's excitement was palpable, her every action fueled by a desperate need to see her daughter crowned as the future queen. But beneath her calm exterior, Zalika's heart ached. The injustice of it all weighed heavily on her, and she found herself retreating to the forest more often, seeking comfort in the whispers of the trees and the songs of the birds. The night before the festival, as Zalika finished her chores, she gazed out of the kitchen window at the moonlit forest. A single thought filled her mind. If only there were a way to escape this fate. If only just once, I could be free. Little did she know, the winds of destiny had already begun to shift in her favor. That evening, Zalika's heart felt heavier than ever. The pain of Nashema's cruelty and Malika's arrogance seemed to weigh her down, suffocating her spirit. She couldn't bring herself to stay within the walls of her home, so she slipped away under the cover of night, seeking solace in the one place that always made her feel free: the forest. The moonlight filtered through the canopy of trees, casting ethereal beams upon the forest floor. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers, and the sounds of the night creatures filled her ears. Zalika walked deeper into the woods, her mind consumed with thoughts of the festival she would never be allowed to attend. How cruel it was that fate had led her to a life of servitude, with no hope for something better. But even as her steps slowed and her thoughts grew darker, A feeling stirred in the air, an ancient energy that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She paused, looking around, unsure of what was happening. The trees whispered as if calling her, and the earth beneath her feet seemed to hum with a deep, resonating power. From the shadows emerged a figure, an old woman draped in tattered robes that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Her skin was as dark as the night, her face lined with wisdom and age. Despite her apparent frailty, there was an undeniable aura of strength about her. Her eyes, gleaming like the stars themselves, fixed on Zalika with an intensity that seemed to pierce her soul. "Child," the old woman's voice was soft, but carried the weight of centuries. "Why do you weep in these sacred woods?" Zalika, startled but strangely comforted by the woman's presence, replied, "I am not weeping, but my heart is heavy. I long for something more than the life I am living, and yet I am trapped in a web of cruelty and deceit." The woman nodded as if she had expected this. "I know your pain, young one. I am Nyoka, guardian of these lands. The winds speak of you, and I see the goodness in your heart." She took a step closer, her gaze softening. "I see the purity of your spirit. You are not meant for the life they have given you." Zalika looked up, hope flickering within her chest. "But how can I escape this fate? How can I go to the festival where I will be seen? I have no dress, no jewels, and my stepmother forbids it." Nyoka smiled gently, her eyes filled with ancient wisdom. "You seek freedom, and it is yours for the taking, but only if you truly believe in your own strength. I will give you what you need to take your destiny into your own hands, but remember this: your heart is the key. Let truth guide you, for envy and deceit will only lead you astray." Zalika nodded, her heart racing with both excitement and fear. What did Nyoka mean by those words? With a wave of her hand, Nyoka summoned a glowing light from the depths of the forest, and before Zalika could even blink, her ragged dress began to shimmer and transform. The torn fabric smoothed out and shimmered into a gown of deep blue, adorned with delicate silver thread that sparkled like the night sky. The dress clung to Zalika's form, flowing like water around her feet, making her look as though she were draped in starlight. Her bare feet were soon encased in sandals of fine leather, and a pair of enchanted anklets appeared on her ankles. They sparkled like tiny constellations, glowing softly with every step she took. Zalika gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She had never seen anything so beautiful in her life. This is impossible," she whispered, looking at herself in awe. Nyoka's voice was calm but full of power. "It is not impossible, my dear. It is the truth of your heart that has created this magic. The universe has responded to your kindness, your resilience, and your unwavering hope. Wear these gifts with grace, and they will guide you toward the path you are meant to walk." As Zalika took in the transformation, Nyoka placed a hand on her shoulder. "Now go, child. The festival awaits, and with it your destiny. But remember, do not let envy or deceit cloud your path. The prince will see what is truly in your heart." With a nod, Zalika turned, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt as though she were walking in a dream, but the weight of the anklets on her feet reminded her that this was no illusion. She hurried through the forest, her new dress trailing behind her like a whisper of stars, and as she emerged from the trees, the lights of the royal palace shimmered in the distance. The night was alive with music and laughter, but Zalika's mind was focused only on what awaited her. The grand gates of the palace were already open, and the festivities were in full swing. As she approached, the attendants looked at her with astonishment. The light of the palace seemed to dim in comparison to the glow she carried with her. With every step, the anklets chimed softly, their sparkle catching the eyes of all who passed. Zalika stood tall, her heart racing but steady. She entered the palace grounds, the eyes of the entire crowd following her. She could feel the whispers, the stares, the astonished gasps of those who marveled at her sudden appearance. Never before had she been seen as such a vision of grace and beauty. And yet it was not just her outward appearance that turned heads. It was the confidence and quiet power in her eyes. She was no longer a servant. She was a woman of strength and beauty, ready to take control of her own destiny. As she moved deeper into the festival, Zalika's gaze found the prince. Prince Oba stood across the courtyard, his dark eyes scanning the crowd. The moment his gaze met hers, time seemed to slow. There was no mistaking it. The connection was instant, electric. He had seen many beautiful women in his life, but Zalika was different. Something about her presence, the purity in her eyes, called to him in a way no other had. The prince took a step toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. The crowd parted, as if the very air knew this was a moment that would change everything. And Zalika, with the gifts Nyoka had given her, knew that her journey was only just beginning. The grand festival was in full swing, with the rich scents of roasted meats and exotic spices wafting through the air, mingling with the sounds of laughter, music, and clinking glasses. The royal palace grounds had been transformed into a dazzling display of colour and light, with lanterns hanging from every tree and flags of gold and crimson fluttering in the gentle breeze. It was a night of extravagance, a night meant for celebration, but for Zalika, it felt like the first step on the path to a new life. As Zalika entered the festival, her heart raced with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. The palace was filled with noble families, well-dressed young women, and eager suitors, but none of them had the presence she carried. Her enchanted dress shimmered in the light, its blue fabric like liquid moonlight, and her anklets glittered like stars beneath her feet. With every step she took, she felt as though the world was bending to her will. The whispers of the crowd followed her, and for the first time in her life, she was seen. Not as a servant or a shadow, but as a woman of grace and beauty, worthy of attention. Across the courtyard, Maleka, Nashema's daughter, stood in the center of a group of admiring suitors. She was beautiful, no doubt, her skin flawless and her hair perfectly styled. But there was a sharpness in her eyes, a cruelty in her smile that made her beauty seem less like a gift and more like a weapon. As she caught sight of Zalika, her face twisted into a sneer. She was used to being the center of attention, the jewel of the kingdom, but tonight, Zalika's radiance was impossible to ignore. Malika's gaze shifted from Zalika to Prince Oba, who was standing by the fountain, conversing with a group of nobles. She smirked, knowing that her charm and beauty would captivate him, just as it had done with so many men before. But as she moved closer to the prince, her eyes narrowed in frustration when she saw that his attention was not on her, but on Zalika. The prince, Prince Oba, was tall and striking, with dark eyes that seemed to see through to the very soul. He was known for his stoic nature, rarely showing emotion. But the moment his gaze fell on Zalika, something shifted. There was no mistaking the magnetic pull between them. Without a word, he excused himself from his companions and made his way toward her, his eyes locked on hers, his footsteps steady and sure. Zalika's heart fluttered as she turned toward him, aware of the weight of the moment. This was no ordinary man. This was a prince, a future king. And yet, there was something in his presence that made her calm calm, as though they were simply two people meant to meet under the stars. He stopped in front of her, a warm smile spreading across his face. "You," he said, his voice low and smooth, "are a vision." Zalika blushed, unsure of how to respond. She had never been one for boldness or attention, but there was something in the prince's eyes that made her feel safe, as though she could be herself, free of the judgment and cruelty that had defined her life for so long. "Thank you, Your Highness," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Prince Oba offered his hand, and Zalika took it, her skin tingling at the contact. "I've been watching you from afar," he continued. "There is something about you that is unlike any other woman here." The music swelled, and without waiting for a response, he led her to the center of the courtyard, where a group of dancers had gathered. Zalika's heart pounded in her chest as the prince guided her into a dance. For the first time in years, she felt alive, her body moving in sync with his, as though they were two parts of the same song. The crowd watched in awe, and even Maleka, who had been the center of attention just moments before, was now cast into the background, her face contorted with envy. Nashima, standing nearby, could hardly contain her fury. She had expected Maleka to be the one to catch the prince's eye, not Zalika. Her jealousy burned, and she seethed as she watched the two dance, the prince's attention entirely on Zalika. "Maleka!" Nashima hissed under her breath. "You must do something. She's going to ruin everything." Maleka, still fuming, nodded sharply. "I'll make her pay for this. No one takes what's mine." She swiftly moved toward Zalika, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed her rival. As the dance ended, Maleka was there, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She picked up a goblet of wine from a nearby table, her fingers curling around the base. With a malicious smirk, she stepped forward, her eyes fixed on Zalika's radiant dress. In one swift motion, Maleka spilled the wine all over Zalika's gown, the dark liquid staining the fabric, and she laughed as the crowd gasped in shock. "You should have stayed in the shadows where you belong," Maleka sneered. "You're nothing but a fraud." Zalika stood frozen, her heart sinking as she looked down at the ruined dress. She felt the sting of humiliation, the familiar feeling of being worthless, of being nothing in the eyes of others. But before she could say anything, she felt the cool touch of her enchanted anklets, and they began to glow softly, their light flickering brighter as the crowd fell silent. The prince, who had been watching the scene unfold, stepped forward, his eyes wide with surprise. "What is this?" he muttered, his gaze fixed on the glowing anklets. They sparkled with the intensity of 1,000 stars, casting a soft light on Zalika's face. Maleka's smug smile faltered as she realized the power of the enchanted anklets. They were not merely jewelry, they were a symbol of Zalika's purity, her innocence, and the truth of her heart. The prince raised his hand, and the crowd fell completely silent. His voice rang out, steady and commanding. "Enough," he said. "This is no fraud. Zalika is not a woman to be disrespected or scorned. Her heart speaks louder than any accusation." Zalika's breath caught in her throat as the prince turned to her, his eyes soft with understanding. "I see the truth of who you are," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "And I intend to visit your home to learn more. I must know who you truly are, Zalika." Nashima and Maleka stood in stunned silence, their plans unraveling before their eyes. They had underestimated the power of the truth, the power of a heart that shone brighter than any jewel or dress. As the prince led Zalika away from the crowd, the air around them felt charged with anticipation. Zalika's heart soared as she realized that her destiny was unfolding before her, and nothing, not even the cruelty of her stepmother or the envy of Maleka, could stand in her way now. Nashima's rage simmered beneath the surface, her mind racing with ways to undo everything that had happened. The prince's visit to Zalika's home, which had once seemed like a simple gesture of curiosity, had now become the final obstacle in Nashima's carefully laid plans. How could she allow her stepdaughter, a mere servant in her eyes, to ruin everything? How could she let someone with so little power overshadow her own daughter, Maleka, who was born to be royalty? Nashima knew she had to act fast. The prince had already shown interest in Zalika, and with each passing moment, that interest grew stronger. If Zalika were allowed to speak freely to the prince, if her heart were exposed to him, the truth of her innocence and purity would only make the prince more determined to make her his bride. Nashima could not let that happen. In the dead of night, Nashima entered Zalika's room, her face twisted in a mask of cold determination. Without a word, she grabbed Zalika by the arm and pulled her toward the attic. The old wooden floor creaked under their weight, and the air in the attic was thick with dust, but Nshema didn't care. She slammed the door shut, locking it behind her. "You will not ruin this for me, Zalika," Nshema hissed, her voice filled with venom. "The prince will never choose you. I will see to it." Zalika's heart raced as she stared at the bars of the attic window, feeling the weight of her stepmother's cruelty pressing down on her. She tried to speak, but Nshema cut her off. "Do you know what I'm going to do?" Nshema continued, pacing back and forth. "I will tell everyone that you are a sorceress, that you use dark magic to enchant the prince. I'll spread the word, and the people will believe me. You're just a servant, Zalika. You don't belong in the palace. You don't belong with him." Zalika's throat tightened, but she refused to cry. She had faced too many hardships in her life to let Nshema break her now. She had fought for her freedom once before, and she would do so again. But how? Nshema's voice continued to echo in the attic, filling Zalika's mind with doubt and fear. "You'll stay here until the prince comes. By then, I will have convinced him that you are nothing but a witch, a dangerous one at that, and Malika, she'll be the one to marry him." With a final mocking laugh, Nshema left the attic, locking the door behind her. Zalika sat in silence, the weight of her stepmother's words pressing heavily on her chest. For a moment she thought of giving up. Perhaps she wasn't meant to be with the prince after all. Perhaps this was the end of the road. But then she remembered the words Nyoka had spoken to her in the forest. "The truth of your heart will guide your destiny." Zalika's heart was pure, her intentions noble. She had done nothing wrong, and she would not let Nshema's lies stand in the way of her future. In that moment, something stirred deep within her, a song that had been lodged in her memory ever since she met Nyoka. It was a melody the old woman had taught her, a song of the forest, of nature's whispers, and the animals that called the land home. Zalika closed her eyes and hummed the tune softly, her voice trembling but steady. As she sang, a soft rustle filled the attic, and from the shadows, a pair of glowing eyes emerged. It was a bird, one of the many creatures that had come to know Zalika through her kindness. The bird cocked its head, as if listening, and then flew toward the window. Zalika's heart lifted with hope. She continued to sing, her voice growing stronger, and soon the sounds of the forest filled the air. She could hear the flutter of wings, the soft padding of paws, and the low growls of distant creatures. Nyoka had promised her that the animals of the forest would come to her aid if she ever needed it, and now was the time. Moments later, a fox appeared at the window, its fur shimmering in the moonlight. It leapt gracefully through the small opening and trotted towards Zalika, its eyes full of purpose. Following the fox, a deer appeared, its hooves tapping gently on the attic floor. It was soon joined by a family of monkeys, their small hands reaching towards Zalika, eager to help. They had all come, at Nyoka's bidding. Zalika knelt down and whispered to them, her voice soft and urgent. "Please help me. I need to get to the prince before Nshema destroys everything." The animals, understanding her plea, sprang into action. The fox scurried to the door, its small paws working swiftly to unlock it. The deer nudged Zalika toward the window, and the monkeys climbed up to the rafters, pulling down a rope of vines they had gathered from the forest. With the rope secured, Zalika climbed out of the attic window, her heart pounding as she descended down the side of the house. The animals below watched her every move, ensuring that she was safe. Once she was on the ground, the fox led the way, darting through the forest with incredible speed. Zalika followed, her breath coming in quick gasps as she ran. Through the thick underbrush they went, Zalika's feet light and quick, the animals guiding her through the darkest parts of the forest. The night was alive with sound, the hoot of an owl, the rustling of leaves, and the distant calls of animals. But despite the chaos around her, Zalika remained focused, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. As they neared the edge of the forest, the palace came into view, its towering spires glowing under the moonlight. Zalika's heart soared at the sight. She had made it. She was going to see the prince, and nothing, not even Nashima's deceit, could stop her now. But as she approached the palace gates, a new challenge awaited her. A procession was already gathering in the courtyard, and the prince, dressed in regal attire, stood at the front, preparing to announce his choice. Zalika's pulse quickened, but she pushed through the crowd, her eyes locked on the prince. She had to make it to him. She had to make him see the truth before Nashima's lies could take root. With the support of the forest animals, Zalika stepped forward, her heart full of courage. This was the moment she had been waiting for, and she would not let Nashima's evil win. As Zalika stepped into the grand courtyard of the palace, her heart pounded fiercely, each beat echoing in her chest. She had made it. The sounds of the festival and the murmurs of the crowd seemed to fade away as her eyes locked onto the prince, standing tall at the front of the gathering. His regal presence illuminated the night, but it was his eyes that captured her heart. They were filled with curiosity, concern, and hope. Zalika knew she was close to her destiny, but she had to act quickly before Nashima's lies took root. The prince's voice rang out through the courtyard. "I have seen many beautiful women tonight, and I have danced with many. But there is one whose heart is as pure as the stars above, a woman whose spirit has captured my attention." The crowd grew silent, and Zalika could see the expectant look on Maleka's face. She, too, had heard the prince's words and thought he would choose her. But that moment of arrogance quickly shifted into shock as Zalika stepped forward, interrupting the prince's speech. Her voice was steady, but her words carried the weight of her journey. "Prince Oba," she called, her gaze never leaving his. "I must speak the truth." The murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd as Nashima's eyes widened in disbelief. She had never expected Zalika to show her face here, let alone challenge her plans in front of the royal court. Maleka's face contorted in anger, but she too was frozen by the courage that radiated from Zalika. Zalika stepped further into the light, her shimmering dress glinting under the moon as she gathered the strength to speak. Her thoughts drifted briefly to Nyoka, whose blessing had guided her to this moment. She was not alone. She had the truth, and that was more powerful than any lie. "Nashima is not who she appears to be," Zalika continued, her voice unwavering. "She is a woman driven by envy and greed, willing to go to any lengths to see her own daughter sit on the throne. She's forced me to live in servitude, denied me my rightful place in this family, and lied about the death of my father, Chief Bakari." A shocked gasp rippled through the crowd. Nashima's face drained of colour, and she stepped forward, her voice shaking. "What is she saying? This is nonsense. She is a liar." But Zalika held her ground, her resolve stronger than ever. "It is not nonsense, Your Highness. My father did not die by accident. Nashima orchestrated his death, poisoning him so she could take control of the household. I was left in her hands, and she mistreated me, forcing me to do all the work, while she plotted to marry her daughter to you. But I will not stand by while she continues to deceive you and everyone else. My father was a good man, and his death was not an accident. Nashima killed him to fulfill her own ambitions." The prince's eyes widened with shock, but Zalika could see the truth sinking in. His gaze flickered from Zalika to Nashima, who now stood frozen in disbelief. The prince raised his hand, signaling for silence. "Are these accusations true?" Prince Oba's voice rang out, his tone heavy with authority. Nashima's face twisted into a sneer. "No, no, she is mad. Do not listen to her. She's trying to ruin everything, to destroy what is meant to be." But Zalika was not deterred. She turned to the gathered courtiers, her voice steady as she spoke to them. "I have no reason to lie. I have suffered at her hands for so long, and I am not the only one. My father trusted her, and she betrayed him. It was only after his death that she seized control, using my grief to manipulate me into staying under her thumb. She knew I would never leave my family's home, so she used me as a pawn. The royal court watched in stunned silence, and Zalika felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. She had nothing to lose but the truth, and the truth would set her free. At that moment, Nyoka's spirit materialized beside Zalika, her presence a calming force in the midst of the tension. The forest guardian's voice echoed in the wind, soft yet powerful. Zalika speaks the truth. I have seen it. I have witnessed the cruelty that has been inflicted upon her. It is time for justice. The prince's eyes narrowed as he processed Nyoka's words. You claim to be a spirit. What proof do you have of these allegations? Nyoka raised a hand, and in an instant, the air around them seemed to shimmer. The court gasped as an ethereal image of Chief Bakari appeared before them, a vision of the late chief in his prime, standing proud and regal. His ghostly figure looked down upon Nashima, and the image seemed to glow with an intense energy. This is the truth, Nyoka said, her voice carrying on the wind. The spirits of the land know what happened, and they bear witness to Zalika's words. Nashima's treachery is written in the spirit world, as much as it is in the physical realm. Nashima staggered back, her eyes wild with fear. She could not deny the evidence that had just been presented. The prince turned his gaze toward her, his expression hardening. You have lied to me, Nashima, he said, his voice cold and unforgiving. And you have destroyed the life of an innocent woman. You will be held accountable for your actions. Maleka, seeing the tide turning, rushed to her mother's side, but her pleading eyes fell on deaf ears. The prince had made his decision. The guards moved quickly, seizing Nashima and Maleka and dragging them from the courtyard, their cries of protest echoing in the night. Zalika's breath caught in her throat, the weight of everything that had just transpired settling in. She had done it. She had uncovered the truth, and justice had been served. The royal court turned to her with admiration, their faces full of respect for her courage and resilience. Prince Oba approached Zalika, his eyes softening as he looked at her. Zalika, you have shown great strength. You have not only fought for yourself, but for your father's legacy as well. I owe you an apology for not seeing the truth sooner. Zalika smiled faintly, her heart full of relief. I did not fight for an apology, Your Highness. I fought because it was the right thing to do. The prince extended his hand to her, his gaze filled with admiration. Then, may I have the honor of marrying the woman who has proven to be stronger than any crown? Zalika hesitated for a moment, her heart racing as she considered the future. But the prince's gaze held nothing but sincerity, and Zalika knew that this was where she belonged. She had fought for a better life, and now she was about to receive it. I would be honored, Prince Oba, she said, taking his hand. And with that, the crowd erupted in applause, celebrating the triumph of truth over deceit, of resilience over oppression. Zalika had won not only the prince's heart, but the respect of all who had witnessed her journey. She had fought for justice, and she had found it. The sun had barely set over the kingdom of Nzalanga, casting a warm golden hue over the land, as the grand celebration unfolded in the palace courtyard. Prince Oba, standing tall beside Zalika, gazed at her with a love so pure it radiated throughout the entire crowd. His eyes were filled with admiration and respect for the woman who had proven not only her beauty, but also her courage, integrity, and strength. With the royal court gathered around, the prince took a step forward, holding Zalika's hand gently. A hush fell over the gathering, all eyes fixed on the pair at the center of the courtyard. He raised his voice so that all could hear. People of Anzalanga, my heart has chosen, and my destiny has been fulfilled. This woman, the one who has endured so much, the one whose kindness shines brighter than the stars, is the one I choose to stand by my side. Zalika, Not only have you won my heart, but you have earned the love and respect of our people." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing off the palace walls. But none were louder than the joyous cry that left Zalika's lips. Her heart soared as she gazed into the prince's eyes, overwhelmed by the love and admiration he was showering upon her. He had chosen her not for her beauty, but for the strength of her spirit. Prince Oba smiled, kneeling before her, and in a moment that would go down in history, he held up a delicate gold ring that sparkled like the stars above them. "Zalika, will you be my queen? Will you rule by my side and help lead this kingdom into an era of peace and prosperity?" Tears filled Zalika's eyes as she gazed at him, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. She had dreamed of this moment, but she never could have imagined it would come with such depth and meaning. Her life had been filled with hardship and cruelty, yet now she stood on the precipice of everything she had ever hoped for. "I will, Prince Oba. I will be your queen," she said, her voice steady and full of emotion. The prince slipped the ring onto her finger, and once again the crowd erupted into cheers. The palace bells rang in celebration, signaling the start of a new era for the kingdom of Nzalanga, one where love and fairness would reign supreme. As the celebration continued, Zalika's thoughts wandered to Nyoka, the spirit who had guided her and helped her find the strength to face the trials that had come her way. She had kept her promise, and the kindness in her heart had led her to her true destiny. She knew deep down that she owed much of her newfound happiness to the wisdom and magic of Nyoka. Later that evening, as the last of the royal guests had retired and the festivities began to wind down, Zalika stood alone in the palace garden. The moonlight bathed the flowers in silver, and the air was cool and fragrant with the scent of jasmine. It was there that Nyoka appeared, stepping out from the shadows like a vision from the forest itself. "You have done well, Zalika," Nyoka said with a smile that radiated warmth and peace. "You have embraced your destiny with grace and strength." Zalika smiled, her heart full of gratitude. "I could not have done it without you. Your guidance brought me here, and your magic helped me find the courage to speak the truth. You showed me that the heart's purity can never be dimmed by deceit." Nyoka nodded. "Indeed. Remember always that it is the heart that guides us and the truth that sets us free. You have shown that, Zalika. Your kindness, your resilience, and your unwavering belief in what is right have made you a beacon of hope for your people." Zalika looked at Nyoka with a mix of wonder and respect. What will happen now? Now your true reign begins. You are more than a queen by title. You are a queen in spirit, a queen who leads with compassion and wisdom. Your heart will shape this kingdom, and your love for your people will bring forth an era of peace and prosperity. Zalika took Nyoka's hand, her voice filled with emotion. "Thank you. I will honor everything you have taught me." The spirit guardian smiled, her ethereal presence glowing even brighter in the moonlight. "Remember, Zalika, that destiny always favors a pure heart. You have proven that, and now the future is yours to shape." As Nyoka slowly faded into the night, Zalika stood in the garden, feeling the weight of her destiny settle around her. She had come from a life of hardship and betrayal, but now she stood as a queen, ready to lead her people with love and fairness. Her heart was full, not only of love for Prince Oba, but also for the people she had vowed to protect and serve. The moon shone brightly above, and Zalika knew that the darkness of the past had finally been vanquished. A new chapter had begun, one that would be written with kindness, justice, and the unwavering belief that the purest hearts could change the world. And as she stood there, hand in hand with the prince who had chosen her, she knew that their shared future would be one of love, hope, and the fulfillment of a destiny greater than anything she had ever dreamed of.